Detective Carla Monroe drove through the quiet streets just after midnight, the kind of hour when the city seemed to exhale. The hum of her engine was the only sound breaking the silence. She rubbed her temple and glanced at the dashboard clock, 12:43 a.m. She'd been at headquarters since sunrise, wrapping up a week-long investigation into misconduct reports within her own department. Internal affairs wasn't glamorous work, but it was necessary, and she took pride in being the one who held the badge to the same standard as the law. The road curved past shuttered gas stations and sleeping houses. She was 10 minutes from home when the flash of red and blue lights suddenly filled her rearview mirror. For a second, she thought it might be a passing emergency unit, but the lights stayed behind her, pulsing like a heartbeat. Carla slowed, pulled to the shoulder, and stopped. Her stomach tightened. Not from guilt, but from the quiet, instinctive dread that came with being a black woman alone on a dark road, facing authority that didn't always see you as one of their own. She rolled down her window halfway and kept both hands on the steering wheel. The familiar steps echoed outside. Door slam, boots crunching gravel, the beam of a flashlight slicing through the darkness. License and registration, a man's voice ordered, sharp, clipped, with that tone that said this wasn't going to be a conversation. Carla turned her head slowly, keeping her voice calm. Evening, officer. May I ask what this is about? You were driving a little fast back there, he said, though she knew the road well enough to know she hadn't been. His flashlight flicked across her face, down to the interior of the car, and lingered on her badge, resting in plain view on the passenger seat beside her purse. She passed him her license and registration. Everything's current, she said. The officer barely looked at the documents before glancing back at her. His expression tightened, suspicion creeping into his eyes, the kind that had nothing to do with traffic violations. This your car? He asked. It is, she replied evenly. Registered in my name. He tilted his head toward the badge. That real? Carla's jaw flexed. You can call it in if you like. He didn't move to do that. Instead, he gave a small, humorless laugh. Internal affairs, huh, you people think you're above everyone else. She stayed quiet, watching him carefully. Years in the field had trained her to measure tone, posture, and the temperature of a moment before it turned dangerous. The man was young, mid-30s, maybe, with a buzz cut and the restless energy of someone who liked control a little too much. His hand hovered near his holster even as he stepped closer to her window. Carla's pulse stayed steady, but her mind worked fast. She could flash her credentials, reveal exactly who she was, a captain in internal affairs, not just an investigator, but the head of the unit overseeing officer conduct. But something in her told her to wait. Let him show himself first. He shined the flashlight across the dashboard again. Where you coming from? Work, she said simply. Work where? Downtown precinct. That made him pause. You're a cop. She gave him the faintest smile. Yes, officer. Been one for 16 years. He blinked, uncertain now, the script faltering in his head. He glanced down again at the license and saw her name, Captain C. Monroe, Metropolitan Internal Affairs Division. The flashlight trembled just slightly in his hand. Carla didn't press the moment. She just waited, eyes steady on his. He cleared his throat. Well, just making sure everything's in order. She nodded once. I appreciate that. May I have my documents back now? For a long second, he didn't move. Then, slowly, he handed them over, muttering something about standard checks. As he walked back to his cruiser, she caught her reflection in the side mirror, calm, composed, but weary. Encounters like this always left her with that quiet ache, the reminder that even after years of service, even with the same badge pinned to her chest, she was still too often treated as the other. When the lights faded behind her and she pulled back onto the road, Carla exhaled slowly. She thought it was over. She didn't yet know that the officer's name, the one printed on the ticket book he never used, was already on her department's watch list. And that this brief stop would soon become the start of something much bigger than a routine traffic pullover. Carla sat in her car for a few seconds before starting the engine again. The night seemed heavier now, the air thicker. She wasn't angry. Not exactly, but the unease lingered, the kind that comes from knowing the encounter could have gone differently if she'd said one wrong word, moved too quickly, or raised her voice. Years of experience had taught her how thin the line could be. By the time she reached the next intersection, her phone buzzed. It was a message from her second-in-command, Lieutenant Parker. Got another complaint. Same officer, District 5. We'll talk tomorrow. She stared at the screen. District 5. The same precinct as the officer who had just stopped her. Her pulse quickened, not from fear, but from recognition. The name matched the one she'd seen on the reflective tag on his chest, Officer J. B. Trent. She turned the car around and pulled into a 24-hour diner on the corner. The fluorescent lights were harsh, the coffee burnt, but she needed a moment. Sitting by the window, she replayed the encounter in her head, the clipped tone, the flashlight, the look in his eyes when he realized who she was. She knew that expression. She'd seen it dozens of times across interview tables, the sudden panic of someone realizing that accountability had found them sooner than expected. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. Parker's voice came through, low and tired. "You're not gonna believe it. We just got dashcam footage from a civilian complaint filed last week. Same guy, Trent, pulled over a young couple, no reason. Report says he searched their car without cause and made them sit on the curb for 20 minutes. Carla's jaw tightened. "Send it to me," she said. "Already did." "You okay, Captain? You sound." "I'm fine," she interrupted gently. "Just tired." After hanging up, she opened the video on her phone. The grainy dashcam footage showed what she already expected, a pattern of behavior. Aggressive tone, intimidation tactics, racial profiling thinly veiled as routine checks. She watched in silence, her reflection faintly visible on the phone screen, and thought about the irony. An officer so reckless that he didn't realize the woman he'd just stopped was the very person who'd been gathering evidence against him. When she finally drove home, the city was still and half asleep. Her apartment was dark except for the faint glow from the streetlights bleeding through the blinds. She kicked off her shoes and sat at her desk, opening her laptop. The file on Trent was already open. Multiple complaints, all similar, none yet substantiated enough for disciplinary action. The kind of officer who slipped through cracks too often because he knew how to toe the line without crossing it, at least on paper. Carla leaned back in her chair. She'd dealt with men like him before, the ones who wore the uniform but treated it like armor, not responsibility. She'd spent years dismantling the excuses that allowed behavior like that to thrive. And yet, every time, it hit the same nerve, that a badge didn't always mean integrity, and a title didn't always mean respect. The next morning, she was back at headquarters early. The bullpen was quiet, the hum of computers mixing with the scent of cheap coffee. Parker was already waiting for her by the conference table, a file open in front of him. "You're not gonna like this," he said, handing her a report. "Trent's got a friend in command who's been shielding him. Any time a complaint comes in, it gets buried before it reaches the review board." Carla scanned the paper, her expression unreadable. "Then it doesn't go through command," she said. "It comes straight to me." Parker frowned. "That might ruffle feathers." "Good," she said. "They need ruffling." She thought back to the night before, the flashlight in her eyes, the suspicion in his voice, the way he'd said "you people" like it was an accusation. He had no idea who he'd pulled over. No idea how close his actions were to exposing the rot he'd been part of. She closed the file and stood. "Set up a meeting with him. Tomorrow morning. Don't tell him why." Parker gave a short nod. "You got it, Captain." As he left, Carla walked to her office window. The city outside was waking up, sunlight stretching across the skyline. For a brief moment, she felt the weight of what was coming, the confrontation, the fallout, the politics. But beneath it all, there was something else too, a quiet satisfaction. The game had changed. He thought he'd pulled over another civilian. But this time, the woman in the driver's seat was the one writing the report. Morning sunlight poured through the precinct windows, slicing across the tiled floor in clean lines. The air buzzed faintly with the sound of ringing phones and shuffling paperwork. Carla walked through the main hall with a quiet authority that made heads turn but mouths stay shut. She wasn't tall, but she carried herself like someone who never needed to raise her voice to be heard. Officer Trent sat at a small desk near the far corner, leaning back in his chair, laughing with two other patrolmen. His voice carried easily, loud, careless. He didn't see her at first, not until the other officers noticed her approach and stiffened. When he finally looked up, confusion flickered across his face, followed by the faint smirk of recognition. "Captain Monroe," he said, feigning surprise. "Didn't expect to see internal affairs down here this early. Everything all right? Follow me," she said simply. The laughter died instantly. Trent hesitated, glanced at his colleagues for a split second of silent backup, but they were already turning back to their screens. He stood slowly, adjusting his duty belt, and followed her down the hallway to the interview room. Inside, the air was cooler. A small table sat between them, a camera mounted in the corner. She gestured for him to sit. He did, leaning back again, trying to re-establish control. "So," he said, forcing a casual tone. "What's this about? Somebody complain again?" Carla opened a file and slid a printed photo across the table. It was a still from dashcam footage. Him, standing beside a car, flashlight pointed directly into the face of a young driver. The timestamp read last Friday, 23:08. "I think you already know what this is about," she said quietly. He glanced down, then shrugged. "Routine stop. Guy was acting nervous. Matched a suspect description." Carla didn't look away. "That's interesting, because the report says you stopped them for a broken taillight that wasn't broken. And your body cam," she tapped the table, mysteriously shut off during the interaction. Again, Trent's smirk faltered. "Look, Captain, sometimes the tech glitches. You know how it is." "I do," she said evenly. "I also know patterns. This is the 5th time in 6 months you've had a glitch during a complaint stop." He shifted in his seat. "With all due respect, ma'am, I think this is being blown out of proportion. I'm doing my job, keeping people safe." Her eyes didn't waver. "Keeping who safe?" He didn't answer. She let the silence sit between them for several seconds, heavy and sharp. Then she leaned forward, voice low but steady. "Last night, you pulled me over." That landed like a gunshot in the quiet room. His head snapped up. "Wait, what? You didn't recognize me," she continued. "Which is fine. You shouldn't treat anyone differently based on who they are. But you did. You were aggressive, dismissive. You questioned whether my badge was real." Trent's mouth opened, then closed again. "Captain, if I had known." "That's exactly the problem," she said. "You shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them with basic respect." He looked down at the table, his knuckles tightening. The bravado was gone now, replaced by the slow realization that the person sitting across from him wasn't another complainant or a rookie supervisor. She was the one who signed the suspension orders. Carla opened another file, the new one, compiled overnight. Complaint reports, witness statements, dashcam stills, timestamps. She laid them out like cards in a deck, each one a small piece of a pattern too large to ignore. "You've had multiple complaints in less than a year. All show the same behavior: profiling, intimidation, procedural violations. And each one got buried before review. But as of this morning, all those cases have been reopened." "Every one." He swallowed hard. "Who authorized that?" "I did." The words landed with quiet finality. From the corner of the room, the door opened. Lieutenant Parker stepped in, a clipboard in hand. He gave a curt nod to Carla, then turned to Trent. "Officer, you are hereby placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Turn in your weapon and badge." Trent looked between them, searching for a way out, for someone to vouch for him. But the room stayed silent. Slowly, he unhooked his badge and laid it on the table. Carla stood, gathering the files. "You'll have your chance to respond during review. I suggest you use it wisely." As Parker escorted him out, Trent glanced back once, his face pale. Carla didn't meet his eyes. She simply watched the door close behind them, exhaling slowly. For a moment, the room was still. Then she picked up her badge and clipped it to her belt. The same badge he'd questioned. The same one that had reminded him, too late, that the uniform came with accountability, not immunity. Outside, the precinct buzzed on, unaware that a quiet shift had just taken place. Justice didn't always arrive with sirens and headlines. Sometimes it came in silence, through a calm voice, a steady hand, and a reminder that the system could still work when someone refused to look away. Carla walked back toward her office, the sound of her footsteps echoing softly in the hall. It wasn't victory she felt, just resolve. There would always be another file, another case, another name to confront. But this morning, one of them had finally been held to answer. And that, she thought, was a start.